You're late. Of course you are. My mother's voice reached me before I had both feet inside the Annapolis Yacht Club. She didn't hug me. She didn't even ask how I was doing. Instead, she shoved a rolling suitcase toward me so hard the handle hit my thigh. Carry Julian's uniforms, she said, and don't wrinkle them. For once in your life, try to be useful. I looked down at the navy garment, bag, another duffel stuffed with shoes, and a hard case holding his dress sword. Together, they probably weighed close to 70 pounds. I picked them up without arguing. That always confused people. They mistook silence for weakness. The ballroom buzzed with expensive conversations. Crystal glasses clinked. Waiters floated through the room, carrying trays of crab cakes and champagne. Someone near the entrance was bragging about buying another waterfront property. Someone else was talking about defense contracts. My oversized charcoal blazer felt out of place among the tailored tuxedos and designer gowns. That was the point. The thick fabric hid the burn scars climbing across my left shoulder and collarbone. Most people never noticed them. I preferred it that way. Everyone, my mother called loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "This is my daughter Audrey." Several people smiled politely. Victoria smiled too. Then she ruined it. She works for the government. Nothing exciting. Just pushes paperwork in some air-conditioned basement while real men bleed for this country. A few guests laughed. One man looked uncomfortable before pretending to check his phone. I kept walking. The luggage wheels caught on the edge of a carpet runner. "Careful," my mother snapped. Julian earned those uniforms. I almost laughed, not because she was funny, because if irony had a physical address, it would have been standing in that ballroom. Across the room, my older brother was surrounded by admirals, local politicians, and business leaders congratulating him on his latest promotion. His white dress uniform looked perfect, except for one small wrinkle near the collar. He wore confidence the same way some people wore expensive watches. Coincidentally, he had both. The Rolex on his wrist flashed under the chandelier every time he lifted another champagne glass. I hadn't seen him in 4 months. He didn't notice me until my mother practically delivered me like another piece of luggage. "There she is," Julian said. "Still working overtime for Uncle Sam?" "I work regular hours," he smirked. Sure. That one word carried 10 years of practice. He never needed long speeches. Just enough to remind me where the family thought I belonged. Clarissa stepped beside him wearing a white designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She looked me up and down. "Audrey, you could have dressed up a little." "I did." She tilted her head. "That's your formal outfit?" "It fits." Julian chuckled into his drink. My mother joined him. I set the garment bag carefully across a nearby chair. The bartender called Julian over for another photo with several officers. As he turned, I noticed the collar on his dress whites had folded inward. Without thinking, I reached up. "Hold still." My fingers barely touched the fabric. Crack. My mother's hand hit mine hard enough to sting. The room went quiet around us. She pulled my arm away like I'd tried to contaminate him. "Don't touch him." I looked at her. Her face wasn't angry, it was offended. Those filthy paper-pushing hands don't belong anywhere near a real American hero. Someone standing behind her gave an awkward cough. Nobody corrected her. Nobody said she had crossed a line. Julian adjusted his watch. Then he slowly fixed his own collar. Never looking at me, never telling our mother to stop. He simply smiled. That hurt more than the slap. Not because I expected him to defend me anymore, because he'd become so comfortable watching it happen. I rubbed my hand once and lowered it. No reaction, no argument, no dramatic exit. Years earlier, my father had taught me something while helping me learn to shoot at a small range outside Baltimore. "Inhale 4. I did. Hold 4. I held it. Exhale 4. The noise around me softened. Hold 4. Again. Box breathing. Simple. Reliable. Useful in places where panic got people killed. My father used to say something else. Never let people who know nothing about your life decide what you're worth. Back then, I thought he was preparing me for difficult coworkers. I hadn't realized he was preparing me for family. A server walked past offering champagne. I took a glass, not to celebrate, just to keep my hands occupied. Across the ballroom, a giant projection screen cycled through photographs of Julian receiving awards, shaking hands, smiling beside commanding officers. Every image told the same story. Golden son, perfect officer, pride of the Kensington family. Nobody in that room knew there was another story. One locked behind classified clearances. One connected to a call sign almost nobody outside a handful of secure facilities had ever spoken aloud. Even my own mother had never heard it. There was a reason, and if that reason ever became public, this celebration wouldn't survive the night. I caught myself staring at the brass compasses hanging from a thin chain beneath my shirt. It had belonged to my father. He told me never to carry it unless I needed a reminder. Tonight, I needed one. I closed my fingers around it for exactly 2 seconds before letting it fall back beneath the fabric. That compass had been with me somewhere no one in this ballroom could even point to on a map. It had witnessed a decision that military lawyers still argued about behind closed doors. It had also connected me to one man who made me a promise before we were separated. If we ever meet again outside the wire, he had said, I won't let anyone treat you like you don't matter. I hadn't seen him since. I honestly believed I never would. Which made the sound of my mother's voice pulling me back to reality almost funny. Audrey, she called from across the room. Stop standing around and make yourself useful. So I smiled. Not because she deserved one. Because sometimes the calmest person in the room is the one carrying the biggest secret. And mine was still walking toward this family, even though none of us knew it yet. I slipped away before my mother could find another job for me. The hallway outside the ballroom was almost empty, except for a pair of framed oil paintings and a grandfather clock that sounded much louder than it should have. Through the glass doors leading to the balcony, I could still hear laughter every time another toast was made for Julian. Funny how celebration sounds when you helped pay for it without anyone knowing. I leaned against the railing overlooking the marina. Rows of yachts rocked gently against their slips. Several of them belonged to families my mother admired. She collected wealthy friends the way other people collected vacation magnets. If someone drove an imported car or had a vacation home on the Chesapeake, she suddenly found every excuse to invite them over. She liked appearances. Appearances never asked hard questions. After my father died, everyone assumed he had left enough money to keep the family comfortable. That wasn't true. His life insurance covered the funeral, the mortgage for a while, and not much else. The trust everyone talked about as Dad's legacy had almost disappeared before the first anniversary of his death. Nobody besides our attorney knew what happened next. I did, because I made it happen. During my first classified deployment, combat hazard pay landed in a separate military account every month. I didn't need much of it. My meals were covered. My housing was temporary. Most weeks, I barely had time to spend $20. Instead of letting the money sit there, I called our family's attorney through a secure overseas line. I want anonymous transfers, I told him. To whom my family trust. You understand they'll assume the funds came from your father's estate. I know. You don't want credit. No. He paused. Why? Because they're already trying to hold everything together. At least, that's what I believed back then. Every deployment added more. Hazard pay, hostile fire pay, special duty compensation. Bonuses nobody outside certain military circles even knew existed. Little by little, it became the financial floor beneath the Kensington family. Not glamorous, not noticeable. Just enough to keep the lights on. Then enough to replace a leaking roof. Then enough to prevent overdue tax notices. Then enough to become something entirely different. A country club membership, a European vacation, a red sports car with monthly payments that made me shake my head when I accidentally saw them on trust statements. Over 10 years, more than $180,000 flowed into that account. Every dollar came from work I couldn't describe. Every dollar arrived after assignments I couldn't discuss. Every dollar stayed anonymous because national security mattered more than family recognition. Meanwhile, my mother thanked my father's good financial planning. I never corrected her. Maybe that was my mistake. Inside the ballroom, applause erupted again. Probably another speech. Probably another story about Julian's leadership. I smiled to myself. Leadership. Interesting word. Real leaders usually spent less time talking about themselves. The balcony door slid open. I didn't have to turn around. The smell of expensive cologne reached me first. Julian, there you are. I was enjoying the quiet. You've always liked hiding. I like thinking. He laughed. No, Audrey. You like pretending you're better than everyone. He stood beside me, straightening his jacket. You know what tonight cost? I imagine quite a bit. Almost 28 grand. I'm sure Mom enjoyed planning it. Actually, there's a little problem. Of course there was. His voice had changed, friendlier, almost casual. I'd heard that tone before. It always cost me money. My lease payment bounced. I stayed quiet. My accountant mixed up a transfer. Another pause. I need 15,000. There it was. I'll pay you back. The last time he'd said those words, 6 years had passed without a single payment. The trust can cover it, he continued. Just move the money tomorrow. It can't, he frowned. What do you mean? The account is temporarily locked. For what? Fiduciary review. That wasn't a lie. Our attorney had initiated a scheduled compliance review after several unusually large withdrawals connected to luxury purchases. Julian stared at me. You've got to be kidding. I'm not. You expect me to believe there's no way to access 15 grand? I'm saying nobody can access it until the review is complete. His jaw tightened. Then came the version of Julian I knew best. The charming smile disappeared. You planned this. No. You're jealous. I looked at him. He actually believed it. You've always hated watching me succeed. I don't hate watching anyone succeed. You hate watching me succeed. I said what I meant. He laughed once. Short. Cold. You know what your problem is? I've heard several theories. You don't have a real life. He counted on his fingers. No husband. No kids. No home people actually visit. You hide in some government office pretending your work matters. His grin widened. And now you're a jealous, hollow spinster who can't stand seeing her big brother win. The words landed exactly where he intended. They just didn't stay there. Because while he talked about winning, I remembered a different evening. Not chandeliers, not champagne, no polished marble, just hard-packed dirt beneath my knees. A medic shouting for more gauze. Blood soaking through gloves faster than we could replace them. A satellite radio refusing to lock onto signal. Someone screaming for help 20 feet away. I remembered calculating transmission windows, while another operator held pressure on a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I remembered dust. Heat. The metallic smell that never really leaves your memory. My hazard pay for that deployment had eventually helped purchase Julian's imported convertible. He never knew. The champagne he was drinking tonight had probably been paid for by compensation, received after spending weeks supporting operations where people prayed simply to make it until sunrise. I looked back toward the ballroom. My mother was laughing with a state senator's wife. Clarissa was taking photos beneath a banner celebrating Julian. Neither of them had any idea who kept their world from falling apart for an entire decade. Julian stepped closer. So? So what? Are you going to fix this? I met his eyes. No. He blinked. I'm not risking a legal review. You'd really let your own brother get embarrassed over $15,000? I didn't embarrass you. His face hardened. You always do this. No, Julian. I let the silence settle between us. I just stopped solving problems you created yourself. For the first time that evening, he didn't have a comeback. He simply stared at me with the same expression people wear when an ATM refuses to dispense cash. Not hurt. Not disappointed. Confused. Because somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing me as his sister. I had become something much more convenient, an account he assumed would always stay open. I let him walk away without calling him back. By the time the banquet ended, I had already made peace with the fact that nothing I said would ever change how my family saw me. That realization wasn't new. It had settled in long before that night. The truth was, I had spent years living two completely different lives. One of them fit neatly inside my mother's favorite insult: government clerk, paper pusher. The other didn't officially exist. 18 months earlier, I walked through 3 separate security checkpoints before sunrise, surrendered my phone, my smartwatch, and every electronic device I carried, then stepped into a windowless, sensitive, compartmented information facility inside the Pentagon. Nobody called me Audrey in there. The moment the reinforced steel door sealed behind me, I became one person. Morning, Viper. I nodded at the watch officer. Status: no significant changes overnight. European rotation handed everything over 20 minutes ago. I dropped my bag beneath my workstation and slid into the chair, facing 6 encrypted displays: satellite feeds, communications traffic, joint operational maps, Blue Force tracking, signal integrity reports. Every screen mattered. Every mistake had consequences. Outside that room, my family believed I spent my days pushing files between government departments. Inside that room, entire operations depended on decisions measured in seconds. My role wasn't glamorous. Nobody outside classified programs would ever recognize my face. I wasn't kicking in doors. I wasn't carrying a rifle across mountain ranges. I wasn't the one receiving standing ovations at military dinners. I made sure the people doing those things came home. One of the younger analysts rolled his chair toward mine. We've got intermittent satellite latency over East Africa. How long? About 11 seconds. Route traffic through Falcon Relay 3. We'll lose bandwidth. We can survive slower. We can't survive blind. He nodded immediately. No debate, no ego. Everyone inside that room understood something simple. The mission always mattered more than being right. Hours passed in quiet concentration. Keyboards clicked. Headsets crackled. Operators exchanged short, precise sentences. Nobody wasted words. At 11:18 a.m., I finished reviewing communications integrity for 3 separate special operations task forces. At 11:26, I approved an alternate satellite path after unexpected atmospheric interference. At 11:41, I rejected a routing recommendation because 1 decimal point had been entered incorrectly. That tiny error would have shifted a relay footprint by several miles. Several miles could mean the difference between hearing a distress call or never hearing it at all. People often imagine classified military work as non-stop explosions and shouting. Most days looked nothing like that. Most days were discipline, patience, attention to details so small that nobody noticed them unless something went wrong. The room stayed cold enough to protect the equipment. I kept a black sweater hanging over the back of my chair all year. Coffee wasn't allowed near the consoles. Neither were distractions, including personal phones. Mine sat locked inside a security locker beyond the SIF entrance, completely unreachable, exactly where regulations required it to stay. Around lunchtime, another communications officer headed toward the break room. "You eating today, Viper?" Eventually. "You said that yesterday. I meant it yesterday too," he laughed. "I'll save you a sandwich. Turkey?" "You ask every time, because you keep bringing tuna." He pointed at me. "One day you'll admit tuna is superior. Not today." Tiny conversations like that kept people human. You couldn't spend years making life and death decisions without occasionally arguing about sandwiches. None of us knew that beyond those vault doors, ordinary life kept moving. Cars' children finished school. Families argued over dinner reservations, and inside my locker, my phone kept vibrating. It stopped, started again, stopped, started again. When my shift finally ended nearly 11 hours later, I unlocked the locker. 23 unread text messages. All from my mother. "Audrey, why aren't you answering? Your brother asked for one favor. Stop being Felsonish. You're ruining Julian's big week. He deserves your support. You've always been jealous of him. Call me now." The last message arrived 32 minutes earlier. "If you don't help your family, don't expect us to keep defending you." I stared at the screen. Defending me. That almost made me smile. Nobody in my family had defended me in years. I slid the phone back into my pocket without replying. Whatever argument waited outside could wait another hour. Inside the SIF, there were priorities. Family drama didn't make the list. The next morning began like every other. Security check, identity verification, steel door. Morning, Viper. Morning. I settled into my station. Routine reports filled the monitors. Communications health across multiple theaters remained stable. A maintenance request came through. A satellite synchronization update. An equipment inspection. Normal. Exactly the way everyone preferred it. Then every monitor in front of me flashed red, not sunscreen. All of them. The room changed instantly. Conversation stopped. Someone across the operations floor said one word, "Contact." A piercing alert echoed through the facility. I was already reading the first incoming report. Joint Special Operations Element, Northern Somalia. Communications failure. Possible hostile electronic jamming. Before anyone finished speaking, I was moving. "Get me signal diagnostics. They're dropping in and out." "I know. Find the strongest surviving frequency." Another analyst looked up. "We've lost primary satellite handshake. Secondary, unstable. Then stop chasing perfect." My fingers flew across the keyboard. "Build me a communications bridge through emergency tactical relay." "We've never tested that route under combat load. We're about to." More reports flooded in. Enemy fire, multiple casualties, mountainous terrain, limited air support, extraction delayed. Then the update nobody wanted. "Operators are pinned down." "How many?" "Initial count says 11 SEALs, 6 Marines." The room went silent for half a second. Not because people panicked, because everyone understood exactly what that meant. 11 families, 6 more waiting back home. 17 people depending on strangers sitting inside a windowless room thousands of miles away. One analyst turned toward me. "What are your orders, Viper?" I didn't answer immediately. I enlarged the terrain map, studied elevation, signal loss, weather interference, enemy jamming patterns. Everything connected. Everything mattered. Outside those reinforced walls, my mother probably believed I was sitting comfortably behind a government desk refusing to lend my brother money. Inside those walls, nobody cared about luxury car payments. Nobody cared about country club memberships. Nobody cared about banquet speeches. Somewhere in northern Somalia, Americans were running out of options, and every second we spent looking for the right answer was one less second they had left. I zoomed in another level until the terrain filled every monitor in front of me. The valley was narrow, rock walls on both sides, only 2 practical exits, both covered by hostile positions. A communication specialist looked over my shoulder. They're boxed in. I can see that. Another report arrived. Team leader confirms they're down to less than 30% ammunition. A second later, another transmission struggled through the interference. One operator wounded, then another, then silence. Not because they stopped talking. Because the enemy's electronic jamming swallowed everything. The operations floor exploded into controlled motion. People weren't shouting. They were working. Every person knew exactly what belonged to them. Satellite analysts chased clean signal paths. Intelligence officers compared drone imagery against archived terrain data. Air operations contacted available aircraft. Meanwhile, I focused on one thing: getting those men home. A colonel stepped behind my station. ETA on emergency authorization? A legal operations officer answered before I could. 40 minutes minimum. I looked over my shoulder. They don't have 40 minutes. I know. We need immediate close air support. It's already being requested. Requested. One of the most dangerous words during a firefight. I checked the battlefield updates again. Another operator had been hit. The surviving communications bursts became shorter, breathing, gunfire, coordinates, then static. The colonel folded his arms. Protocol exists for a reason. I didn't disagree. Protocol usually saved lives, but sometimes protocol assumed time existed. This time it didn't. I enlarged the electronic warfare display. The hostile jamming pattern wasn't random. Someone had carefully built overlapping interference zones around military frequencies. Smart, professional. They knew exactly what they were doing, which also meant they probably weren't watching civilian networks. A thought hit me. Fast, uncomfortable, possible. I pulled another database onto the screen. An archived list of commercial satellite frequencies licensed across East Africa. Most had nothing to do with military operations. One caught my attention. Unused. Poorly documented. Almost forgotten after a telecommunications company shut down several years earlier. The satellite itself still existed. Nobody simply used it anymore. I checked orbital position, coverage, signal strength, distance. My pulse stayed steady. This might work. The analyst beside me frowned. What might? I pointed. We're thinking like soldiers. We are soldiers. So are they. He followed my cursor. His eyes widened. You want to piggyback a civilian relay? I'm considering it. That's not authorized. I know. The colonel leaned closer. What are you proposing? I answered honestly. I can bounce encrypted thermal coordinates through this abandoned commercial frequency directly into the Apache targeting systems. His expression didn't change. Has it been tested? No. Approved? No. Documented? No. The room became very quiet. Someone finally asked the obvious question. What happens if it fails? I looked back at the casualty report. They die. Nobody spoke after that. The authorization request continued climbing through military channels. Major command, regional command, legal review, operational approval. Every box had to be checked. Every signature mattered. Normally, I checked the clock. 36 minutes remained. Another transmission broke through, taking heavy, static. Need, nothing. One analyst whispered, "We're losing them." I already knew. Inside the valley, Chief Petty Officer Dane Crawford was one of the operators still transmitting. At that moment, I knew almost nothing about him. Only his call sign. His unit, his position. One tiny blue marker among several blinking across my screen. One human life represented by a digital icon. The system reduced everyone equally. No biographies, no medals, no family photographs, just people who either came home or didn't. I made my decision. I'm routing thermal imaging. The colonel looked at me. You understand the consequences? Yes. You'll answer for this. If they're alive to testify, I'm fine with that. I bypassed the pending authorization. 3 encrypted keys. 1 manual override. 1 command that normally required approval from another office. Access granted. The civilian satellites accepted the handshake. Signals stable, better than expected. My fingers moved almost automatically. Drone thermal imagery, coordinate conversion, target packages. Apache flight routing, encrypted transmission. Sent. The room waited. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then one of the aviation officers looked up. They received it, another voice. Gunships changing heading. Someone farther back said quietly, "My God." The next several minutes felt longer than entire deployments. Nobody breathed much. Nobody left their station. Fresh reports began arriving. Enemy positions engaged. Thermal targeting confirmed. Suppressive fire effective. Communications improving. Then the update I had been waiting for. Ground unit moving. Another. Extraction corridor open. Another. First casualty helicopter inbound. Finally, all personnel accounted for. I stared at the screen. Confirm. 0 operators left behind. Confirm casualties. The operations officer looked at his headset before answering. Multiple injuries. He smiled for the first time. No fatalities. The room didn't erupt into cheers. Real operations rarely did. People simply returned to work. Someone grabbed fresh coffee. Someone updated logs. Someone called medical coordination. That was military life. You saved 17 people. Then you prepared for the next emergency. 3 days later, I was sitting alone inside a conference room. No windows, no decorations, just a long table. 3 senior officers, 1 legal advisor, a digital recorder. The investigation wasn't about whether the rescue worked. Everyone agreed it had. The question was simpler. Did you knowingly violate established operational protocol? Yes. Were you aware the transmission used an unauthorized civilian satellite frequency? Yes. Did you seek formal approval before initiating that action? No. The legal advisor adjusted his glasses. You understand that unauthorized communications can compromise future operations. I do. So why did you proceed? I answered exactly once. Because waiting 40 minutes would have buried 17 Americans. Nobody interrupted. The recorder kept running. One officer finally leaned back. You understand this decision may affect your career. I understood that before I pressed enter. The meeting ended without a conclusions. No congratulations, no medals, no applause, just paperwork. By Friday evening, I drove back to my mother's house, hoping for one quiet weekend before returning to work. My key didn't fit. I thought I had the wrong one. Then I noticed the trash bags. 3 black contractor bags sat on the front porch beside 2 cardboard boxes. My clothes, books, childhood photographs. Even the brass desk lamp my father had given me after graduating school. The front door opened. My mother didn't invite me inside. "Oh, you're here." I looked from her to the bags. "What happened?" "We needed the room." "For what?" She answered as if it were obvious. "Julian bought new golf clubs." I waited. Surely there was more. There wasn't enough storage. I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because after everything that had happened that week, after every report, every life, every investigation, I had somehow imagined home would still feel like home. Victoria crossed her arms. "You barely live here anyway. I told you I was on assignment. You disappear for months. I can't always explain why, exactly." She pointed toward the bags. "You should have found your own place years ago." I looked down at the worn duffel bag resting on top. Inside, it were the same uniforms I had worn while helping save 17 service members. My mother never asked where I'd been. She never asked why I looked exhausted. She never asked whether I was safe. She only knew one thing. Julian did space for his golf equipment. So the daughter who had quietly helped bring 11 fathers, sons, husbands, and brothers home alive could sleep somewhere else. I set my coffee on the marble island before either of them said a word. The Kensington kitchen had always been my mother's favorite room whenever she expected company. Fresh flowers stood in the center of the island. Copper cookware hung above the stove, polished so often they looked brand new. The refrigerator wore family photos carefully chosen to tell a story that never really existed. There wasn't a single picture of me. Not one. Victoria stood by the espresso machine while Clarissa organized a stack of papers into a perfectly straight pile. Neither of them smiled. That usually meant they wanted something expensive. "Sit down," my mother said. "I'd rather stand." "This won't take long." "I hope not." Clarissa slid a leather folder across the counter until it stopped in front of me. "Just routine estate planning." I opened it. The first page carried the logo of a local law office. The second page made my eyebrows rise. Voluntary property interest transfer. I kept reading. According to the document, I would permanently surrender my 50% ownership of my father's lake house to Clarissa without financial compensation. No buyout, no appraisal, no exchange, just a signature. I looked up. Interesting definition of estate planning. Clarissa folded her hands. It simplifies everything. For who? For the family. I almost asked which family. Instead, I turned another page. The paperwork had already been signed by Julian. Naturally. Victoria leaned against the counter. You don't even use the lake house. I visited last fall. You stayed one night. I still own half of it. Clarissa spoke as though explaining something to a child. Julian and I are thinking long term. I noticed. We want to renovate. I'm sure you do. The property should stay with the people actually building a future. I closed the folder. My father built that future. Nobody answered. Silence usually irritated my mother. Audrey, don't make this difficult. I'm then sign. No. The word landed softly. No anger, no hesitation, just no. Clarissa blinked. I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. Victoria sighed dramatically. You never cared about that house. I care exactly as much as Dad did. Her jaw tightened. Your father would have wanted Julian to have it. I met her eyes. You don't know that. I was married to him, and I was his daughter. That ended the conversation for exactly 3 seconds. Then Clarissa tried another angle. We've already spoken to contractors. I'm sure they'll understand delays. You'd seriously block. Your own brother? I'm protecting my legal property. It's just a cabin. No, I shook my head. It stopped being just a cabin the day Dad left half of it to me. The room cooled noticeably. Clarissa reached into her designer handbag and removed a folder filled with renovation sketches. Swimming dock, guest house, expanded boathouse, outdoor kitchen. Everything looked beautiful. Everything also looked expensive. Very expensive. Far more expensive than 2 people carrying multiple luxury car payments should have considered. Something finally clicked. I remembered the trust statements, large withdrawals, credit line advances, repeated transfers, then Julian's request for $15,000. I didn't need classified intelligence training to recognize financial panic. They weren't planning renovations. They were trying to borrow against the property's equity, which meant they needed complete ownership first. I almost smiled, not because they were struggling, because they thought I couldn't see through them. Victoria crossed her arms. What? You need collateral, neither woman answered. The bank said no, still nothing. The trust review scared your lender. Clarissa looked at my mother. Just for a fraction of a second. It was enough. There it was, desperation. Hidden beneath designer clothes and polished manners. My mother recovered first. You've always imagined the worst. No. I pushed the folder back toward them. I simply read numbers. And now you're judging us? I'm observing. Clarissa's voice sharpened. You have no idea what our finances look like. I think I do. She looked away. That told me even more. The silence stretched. Finally, my mother abandoned the polite version of the conversation. If you won't cooperate willingly, here it comes. We'll protect this family another way. I waited. She opened her phone and scrolled until she found a contact. You know Patricia Rowland, the society blogger? Victoria nodded. She owes me several favors. Clarissa smiled for the first time that morning. Not warmly, confidently, Victoria continued. It wouldn't be difficult for a respected local publication to ask questions. What? Questions. Questions about your mental health. I stared at her. She didn't blink. We'll explain that your military service left you unstable. Clarissa picked up where she stopped. That you've become unpredictable. Victoria added another piece. That you're emotionally dangerous. Clarissa's smile widened. I actually laughed. Just once. Not loudly. Enough to surprise both of them. You think that's funny? No. I looked at my mother. I think it's desperate. Her expression hardened. You think people won't believe it? I shrugged. I don't spend much time worrying about gossip. It won't be gossip. She stepped closer. It'll be interviews. Photos. Stories. We'll tell people you've been hiding psychological problems for years. Clarissa folded her arms. We'll say we're trying to protect the family. The strange thing was, I wasn't angry. Not really. Because anger usually comes from surprise. Nothing they said surprised me anymore. Instead, I studied both of them the same way I would study incomplete intelligence before making a decision. What did they actually have? No medical records, no witnesses, no evidence, just fear. Their own fear. Fear of debt. Fear of losing appearances. Fear that the money keeping everything together might disappear. And they weren't entirely wrong, because the review of the trust account wasn't just another administrative process. Questions were finally being asked. Questions they never imagined anyone would ask. I rested both hands on the marble countertop. My answer is still no. Victoria stared at me. You'd destroy this family over a house? I spoke quietly. No, I just won't destroy Dad's memory to rescue choices you made. Clarissa grabbed the unsigned paperwork. You'll regret this, maybe. You have nobody. I've survived with less. My mother pointed toward the door. You always make everything harder. I picked up my coffee. It usually gets hard right before the truth comes out. Neither of them understood what I meant. How could they? They still believed they were negotiating with the quiet daughter they could shame into paying another bill. They didn't know their financial foundation had already started shifting beneath them. As I reached the hallway, my phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Promotion banquet. 6 hours. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without dismissing the notification. For some reason, I found myself thinking about another story we've shared on this channel, where one carefully hidden lie eventually pulled down an entire family built on appearances. If that case stayed with you, watch the recommendation waiting in the top right corner of your screen between minutes 45 and 55. Sometimes the most unbelievable endings begin with the smallest signature someone refuses to write. I walked toward the front door, carrying nothing except my coffee. Behind me, the unsigned papers remained exactly where they belonged. I handed my invitation to the hostess without expecting my name to matter. She checked the guest list, smiled politely, and reached for a seating chart. Before she could speak, my mother appeared beside her. She's with us, Victoria said. The hostess nodded. Wonderful. Ms. Kensington is seated at table. I already arranged it. Victoria took the seating card from the hostess before she could finish. I'll show her. I thanked the hostess anyway. It wasn't her fault. The ballroom looked exactly the way expensive celebrations are supposed to look. White linen covered every table. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished hardwood floors. A string quartet played near the fireplace, while servers moved between 150 guests, carrying silver trays filled with filet mignon, lobster tails, and glasses of sparkling wine. Local politicians shook hands with retired admirals. Business owners compared investment portfolios. Several active duty officers stood near the stage discussing upcoming assignments. Everyone looked like they belonged. My mother walked me past every good table, past the front row, past the family tables, past the military guests, past the sponsors, past the photographers. She finally stopped near the back corner of the ballroom. A gray service door sat 3 feet behind the chair. Beside it stood a yellow janitor's cart loaded with fresh towels, cleaning supplies, and a mop bucket hidden beneath a black plastic cover. A waiter pushed through the service door carrying dirty dishes. Another came out balancing fresh meals. Victoria placed my seating card on the table. There, I looked around. 6 empty chairs, no centerpiece, no wine already poured, no table number displayed where guests could easily see it. This is my seat, she smiled without warmth. I thought you'd appreciate the privacy. I see. The photographers will mostly stay near the stage. I'm sure they will, she lowered her voice. Honestly, Audrey, your plain look isn't exactly festive. I waited, and that oversized blazer certainly isn't helping. It serves its purpose. I'm trying to protect the family photos. There, it is. What? The real reason? She sighed dramatically. You don't understand presentation. No. I understand priorities. She leaned closer. People notice everything. I've noticed. I don't want our guests asking uncomfortable questions. About what? Why my daughter dresses like she's attending a tax seminar. I almost smiled. I left my sequined combat boots at home. She didn't appreciate that. You always have jokes. No, I just ran out of apologies. She walked away before I finished straightening my chair. I sat down, not slouched, not hiding, shoulders square, feet planted. Years in uniform had a way of becoming permanent even when you wore civilian clothes. A server approached my table. Would you like champagne, ma'am? Water is fine. He looked surprised. Still water or sparkling, whichever one's colder. He nodded. I'll be right back. The service door opened again. Someone pushed another cart past me. One of the kitchen staff offered an apologetic smile. Sorry about the traffic back here. No problem. Oddly enough, it was the most genuine interaction I'd had all evening. From my corner, I could see almost the entire ballroom. Julian stood near the stage laughing with 2 Navy captains. Clarissa posed for photographs every few minutes. My mother flowed from guest to guest, introducing herself as though she were hosting a presidential inauguration instead of a promotion dinner. The projection screen displayed a slideshow of Julian's official portraits. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect career. It was remarkable how easy it was to build a flawless image when nobody questioned the foundation underneath it. The server returned with my water. Kitchen made an extra crab cake. Interested? I won't argue with free food. He grinned. I respect that. At least somebody had a sense of humor. Dinner began. Silverware clinked softly. Conversations blended together into the familiar sound of wealthy people congratulating one another. Every few minutes, someone looked toward my corner. Not because I was interesting, because my mother had made sure I was visible enough to become part of the scenery, not family, decoration. Halfway through the entree, the lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage. Victoria walked to the microphone, wearing a navy evening gown that matched Julian's dress whites almost perfectly. She tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, the room quieted immediately. Thank you for joining our family tonight. Applause. She smiled modestly, accepting praise nobody had offered. My son, Julian, has always been extraordinary. Another round of applause. As a little boy, he never settled for second place. I took a sip of water. Interesting. I remembered helping him with algebra because second place had actually been optimistic. He devoted his life to serving this tree. More applause. He represents everything the Kensington family believes in. She gestured toward Julian, the true shining light of our family's legacy. Guests stood. Glasses rose. Someone shouted, "Here!" Julian accepted every compliment with practiced humility. Not once did he suggest his mother was exaggerating. Not once did he acknowledge anyone else's contributions. He simply enjoyed the moment. Then Victoria looked toward my corner. I knew what was coming before she opened her mouth. And of course, she smiled sweetly. Every family has different paths. Several heads turned. She extended one perfectly manicured hand toward me. Our quiet little guest back there. 150 people followed her gesture. Audrey works for the government. Polite laughter. She mostly shuffles paperwork. A few more chuckles. She's a reminder of what happens when you don't strive for excellence. The laughter grew slightly louder. Not cruel, not hysterical, just enough. The kind of laughter people give when they assume everyone else approves. One businessman glanced at me before awkwardly joining in. A state representative looked down at his plate instead. Several military officers didn't laugh at all. They simply watched. I didn't lower my head. I didn't stare at the floor. I didn't pretend to check my phone. I sat exactly where she'd placed me. Back straight, hands rested calmly beside my plate, breathing exactly the way my father taught me years ago. 4 in, hold. 4 out, hold. My mother's words echoed through the ballroom. They no longer echoed inside me. Across the room, Julian slowly lifted his champagne glass. He looked directly into my eyes. Then he gave me the smallest smile. Not joyful, victorious. As if tonight had finally settled the question of which Kensington mattered. I returned the look without blinking. He mistook silence for surrender. That had always been his greatest mistake. Because people who truly understand military operations know something civilians often don't. The quietest moment isn't always the safest one. Sometimes, it's the few seconds before everything changes. And somewhere beyond the heavy oak doors of the yacht club, completely unaware of the speech still echoing through the ballroom, a man I hadn't seen in 18 months had just arrived from a deployment briefing, still carrying dust from a battlefield where our paths had crossed long before anyone in this room knew the name Viper. I reached for my water just as the ballroom doors exploded open. The sound wasn't loud because someone slammed them. It was loud because 2 solid oak doors hit their stops at the same time. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused halfway to someone's mouth. Then came another sound. Combat boots. Heavy. Fast. Deliberate. The polished hardwood floor carried every step through the silent ballroom. I looked toward the entrance. A man in a dirt-stained navy working uniform walked straight inside without slowing down. His sleeves were rolled. His boots carried dried mud that clearly hadn't come from Maryland. A deployment patch sat above his left pocket. His duffel bag hung from one shoulder as though he'd walked straight from an aircraft instead of a hotel. I recognized him immediately. Chief Petty Officer Dane Crawford. 18 months had added a few more lines around his eyes. Nothing else had changed. He still moved like someone who automatically evaluated every doorway, every hallway, every person within sight. The room reacted before anyone actually knew why he was there. Several active duty officers stood instinctively. A retired admiral whispered something to the businessmen beside him. Someone near the front quietly said, "That's Crawford." Another answered, "The Crawford?" Apparently, even social circles had heard the stories. My mother certainly had. Her entire posture changed. Gone was the woman who had mocked me minutes earlier. Now she wore her favorite expression, "Important people are watching." Victoria hurried toward him with the confidence of someone already planning tomorrow's newspaper headline. Julian followed immediately. Clarissa wasn't far behind. I stayed where I was. Dane never looked toward the stage. He never glanced at the decorations. He didn't appear impressed by the chandeliers or the expensive suits. His eyes kept moving, searching. Victoria reached him first. "Chief Crawford," she extended both hands enthusiastically. "What an incredible honor. I'm Victoria Kensington." He didn't stop. "My son is Captain Julian Kensington." Julian stepped forward wearing his practiced smile. "It's a privilege to finally meet you," he offered his hand. "I'm a great admirer of Team 6. No response. Not even a glance." Dane continued walking. Julian awkwardly kept his hand suspended in the air for another second before lowering it. Clarissa recovered first. "We'd love to introduce you to some distinguished guests." Still nothing. Victoria tried again, moving sideways to remain in front of him. "You simply must join us on stage." He adjusted the duffel bag on his shoulder without breaking stride. Then, in a calm voice that somehow carried farther than shouting ever could, he spoke exactly 5 words. "Please step out of my way." Not rude, not angry, just absolute. Victoria froze. I had seen that tone before. Operators used it when hesitation could cost lives. She stepped aside automatically. Julian forced a laugh. "I think there may be some confusion." There wasn't. Dane walked directly past him. No handshake, no congratulations, no acknowledgement that either one existed. The room followed him with complete silence. People began looking at one another. Whispers spread from table to table. Who was he looking for? Was he invited? Did something happen? The master of ceremonies lowered the microphone. Even the quartet had stopped playing. I watched Dane's eyes, not wandering, tracking. Every few feet, he scanned another section of the ballroom, methodical. The same way someone searches a landing zone before committing to it. He wasn't here by accident. He wasn't sightseeing. He was looking for one person. A young Navy lieutenant quietly approached him. "Chief, can I help you find someone?" "Already doing it." "Do you have a name?" "No." The lieutenant looked confused. "No?" "I have a call sign," he continued walking. That single sentence meant almost nothing to civilians. To the officers scattered throughout the ballroom, several of them exchanged puzzled looks. One Air Force colonel quietly muttered, "A call sign?" Another officer frowned. "Whose?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew, except me. I wrapped my fingers around the water glass. For the first time that evening, my pulse climbed slightly. Not from fear, from probability. Surely not. There were thousands of people in the military, thousands of operations, hundreds of classified missions. The odds of him walking into this exact ballroom, looking for me, didn't make sense. Then I remembered something he had told me over an encrypted radio after the extraction. If I ever get the chance, the transmission had broken apart before he finished. I never heard the rest. Across the ballroom, Dane stopped beside one of the senior admirals. The admiral offered his hand. "Crawford." "Sir, we weren't expecting you. I know. What brings you here?" "I'm completing unfinished business." The admiral looked puzzled. "What kind of business?" "I owe someone my life." The sentence drifted across the room. Enough people heard it that another wave of whispers followed. Victoria somehow interpreted those words as another opportunity. She veered back into the conversation. "My son has served with exceptional distinction." Dane didn't even turn his head. "I'm not here for your son." Her smile faltered. Julian cleared his throat. "Perhaps we know some of the same people." "We don't." It wasn't an insult. It sounded like a fact. Julian wasn't used to facts he couldn't argue with. The silence became almost uncomfortable. Even waiters stopped moving. One accidentally bumped a serving cart because he couldn't stop watching. Dane resumed walking, straight down the center aisle, straight past the front tables, straight past local politicians, past decorated officers, past executives, past everyone my mother believed mattered. Every step carried him farther from the spotlight and closer to the darkest corner of the ballroom. Closer to the service entrance, closer to the yellow janitor's cart, closer to me. I didn't stand, didn't wave, didn't call his name. I wasn't even certain he remembered my face. Most operators never saw mine. They heard a calm voice through encrypted headsets. They followed coordinates. They trusted instructions. Then they went home. That was enough. 20 feet. He never looked away. 15. My mother finally noticed where he was headed. She turned toward my table, then back toward him. Confusion slowly replaced confidence. Julian followed her gaze. His smile disappeared. 10 feet. The room had become so quiet I could hear the wheels of the kitchen cart settling after someone accidentally nudged it. 5 feet. Dane stopped. Not beside the stage, not beside Julian, not beside my mother. Directly in front of the forgotten table beside the kitchen door. He looked at me the same way he had looked at the battlefield map 18 months earlier. Complete certainty. The entire ballroom held its breath. No one understood why one of the most respected combat operators on the East Coast had ignored every VIP in the room just to stand in front of the woman everyone had spent the evening pretending didn't matter. I looked up at him without moving. For a brief second, neither of us spoke. His face was leaner than I remembered from the grainy drone images and classified after-action photographs. A thin scar ran across his jaw that hadn't been there 18 months earlier. His eyes hadn't changed. Calm, focused, certain. Around 150 people waited for someone to explain why one of the most respected SEAL operators on the East Coast had crossed an entire ballroom just to stand in front of the woman sitting beside the kitchen service door. Dane looked down at my oversized blazer, then at my face. A faint smile appeared. I knew you'd still try to disappear. I couldn't help smiling back. I gave it my best effort. He nodded once. I noticed. Several guests exchanged confused glances. My mother stepped forward. Chief Crawford, I believe you've mistaken my daughter for someone else. He didn't answer her. Instead, he asked me a question. You still carry it? I knew exactly what he meant. Without saying a word, I reached beneath the collar of my blazer and pulled out my father's brass compass. The worn brass caught the ballroom lights. Dane looked at it for only a second before letting out the quietest laugh I'd ever heard from him. I told them you would. I tucked it back beneath the fabric. You remember. I remember every voice that brought my team home. The room grew even quieter. Julian frowned. I'm sorry. Brought your team home? Dane ignored him. He took one slow step backward. Then another. Enough space. Enough distance. I knew what was coming half a heartbeat before it happened. His boots slammed together with a sharp crack that echoed through the ballroom. Every spine in uniform instinctively straightened. His posture became perfectly rigid. Then his right hand snapped upward in a flawless military salute. Not casual, not friendly, official, absolute, directed at me. A collective gasp swept across the room. Someone dropped a wine glass. Crystal shattered across the hardwood floor. Nobody looked at it. Every eye remained fixed on us. My mother stared as though she had forgotten how to breathe. Clarissa's whispered, "What is he doing?" Nobody answered. Because nobody there had ever seen a decorated combat operator salute the woman they had spent the evening mocking. I slowly rose from my chair. Military habit took over before conscious thought. I returned the salute. Our hands lowered at exactly the same moment. The silence became almost overwhelming. Then Dane reached to the shoulder strap of his equipment and unclipped a secure tactical radio. Not the kind civilians bought in sporting goods stores. Encrypted. Military issue. He pressed the transmit button. His voice carried across the silent ballroom with the same confidence it had carried across battlefields. Command, hold the briefing. Several officers turned instantly. I have located the lead tactical architect. Another pause. Then the words that changed everything. It's Viper. He looked directly at me. She's right here. The single word echoed against the high ceiling. Viper. For most civilians, it meant nothing. For the military personnel in the room, it meant everything. I heard chairs scrape backward. 15 active duty officers stood almost simultaneously. An Army colonel froze halfway through setting down his coffee. A Marine lieutenant colonel's eyes widened. An Air Force brigadier general actually took one involuntary step forward. One Navy commander whispered, "No." Another answered, "It can't be." A younger communications officer looked directly at me. Viper? The older captain beside him nodded slowly. My God. The atmosphere changed so quickly it almost felt physical. Minutes earlier, those same officers had politely ignored my mother's jokes. Now they were staring at me with unmistakable recognition, not celebrity, respect. The kind earned when people know your decisions once determined whether their friends came home alive. Victoria laughed nervously. There must be some misunderstanding. Nobody paid attention. Julian finally spoke. My sister works in administration. Still, nobody looked at him. Dane lowered the radio. There isn't a single administrator in the Department of Defense who could have done what she did. Julian forced another smile. I think you've confused Audrey with someone classified. I haven't. You've never even met her. That finally earned Julian a look. Just one. You'd be surprised. Dane's voice remained perfectly steady. 18 months ago, my team was trapped inside a mountain valley with almost no ammunition left. Nobody moved. We lost communications. He looked toward the military officers now gathered near the aisle. The rescue requests stalled inside normal approval channels. Several heads nodded. They knew exactly how those systems worked. We were told help couldn't legally arrive for another 40 minutes. He paused. We didn't have 40 minutes. The ballroom had become so quiet that even the kitchen staff stood frozen behind the service door. Dane continued. Someone ignored her own career. Someone ignored bureaucratic safety. Someone accepted personal responsibility for every consequence that followed. He pointed toward me. She built a communications bridge nobody believed would work. His voice softened slightly. And 17 Americans went home. My mother looked from him to me as though trying to solve a puzzle missing half its pieces. Audrey. It was the first time all evening she had spoken my name without criticism attached to it. I didn't answer. Clarissa shook her head. This is impossible. Dane looked at her. No, he said it quietly. What was impossible was surviving that valley. One of the Navy captains near the stage finally spoke. Chief, are you saying? Dane answered before the question finished. I'm saying that every operator in my task unit knows exactly who Viper is. He looked back at me. We just never knew her face. An elderly retired admiral slowly removed his reading glasses. I've heard that call sign. So have I, another officer admitted. The briefings were heavily redacted. Need to know only. The brigadier general folded his arms. I was told the tactical architect declined public recognition. Dane smiled faintly. That sounds like her. I suddenly became aware of the room in a completely different way. Not because people admired me. Because the lies my family had spent 10 years repeating were collapsing one after another without me saying a single word. Government clerk, paper pusher, worthless daughter, every label now sounded absurd. Julian looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear, real fear, because for the first time in his life, he realized the quiet sister he had underestimated might know truths capable of reaching far beyond this ballroom. And Dane Crawford wasn't finished talking. I watched Dane lower the radio without taking my eyes off him. Nobody in the ballroom seemed willing to breathe first. The silence finally broke when a Navy Rear Admiral stepped forward. Chief Crawford, Gore said carefully, if you're making the claim I think you're making, it needs to be supported. Dane nodded once. I expected that, sir. He slipped a compact encrypted JSOC field device from a protective pouch on his vest. It looked ordinary enough to anyone outside the military. To several officers in the room, it clearly wasn't. An Air Force colonel quietly muttered, secure issue. The admiral looked toward the audiovisual technician standing frozen beside the projector. Can that connect? The technician swallowed. HDMI? Yes, sir. Within seconds, Dane walked to the stage. The same stage where my mother had called Julian the shining light of the Kensington family. The technician handed him a cable. Dane connected the secure device to the ballroom projector. The giant 20-foot screen went black. For 3 long seconds, nobody said a word. Then a Department of Defense seal appeared. Across the top of the screen, large letters read, Declassed excerpt, Joint Special Operations Command off public release. A ripple spread through the room. People leaned forward. My mother looked at the screen, then at Julian. What is this? Julian didn't answer. The first slide loaded. A photograph. Mine. Not in civilian clothes. Not hidden beneath an oversized blazer. I stood in operational uniform, expression neutral, looking exactly the way official military portraits are meant to look. Below the photo appeared a line that made my mother grab the edge of a nearby chair. Major Audrey Elizabeth Kensington Joint Special Operations Command Lead. Tactical Communications Director. A murmur rolled through the ballroom. Someone whispered, Major? Another answered. They said she was a clerk. Clarissa slowly backed away from the stage. No, another page appeared. Silver Star awarded for conspicuous gallantry in support of joint special operations under hostile combat conditions. No classified details, no locations, just enough to confirm the award existed. The retired admiral removed his glasses again. I attended that ceremony. He looked directly at me. The recipient's identity was classified. Dane answered quietly. It remained that way until this release. The next slide appeared. A satellite map, thermal imagery, mountain terrain. Colored symbols marked friendly and hostile positions. Across one side of the screen ran a timeline of communications. One military officer stepped closer. I know this operation. So do I, another admitted. Julian's breathing became noticeably uneven. Because he recognized it too. Dane picked up a wireless presentation remote. This image shows the battlefield 18 months ago. He pointed towards several blue symbols surrounded by red. This was my team. The thermal display animated. The room watched blue markers become trapped inside overlapping enemy positions. Hostile fire, communication failures, blocked extraction routes. Then another layer appeared, electronic jamming coverage. One communications officer shook his head. They were completely isolated. Exactly. Dane pressed the remote again. A new line flashed across the screen. Emergency communications avers oft by, call signed. Another silence settled over the ballroom. The timeline continued. Sufficient satellite bridge established. Thermal targeting transmitted. Apache gunships redirected. Extraction corridor created. Zero friendly fatalities. Several officers instinctively applauded. Not loudly, respectfully. The applause spread through the room. I wished it wouldn't. None of this had ever been about recognition. Dane lifted one hand. I'm not finished. The applause stopped. He advanced to another slide. This one carried an internal after-action summary. A highlighted paragraph appeared on the screen. Tactical occurs during initial advance. Bird to unit exposure before communications fulseer. A second highlighted line followed immediately beneath it. Corrective strategy proffed remotely by call sign Viper prevented complete loss of personnel. The rear admiral frowned. Who commanded the initial advance? Dane didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward Julian. The room followed his eyes. Julian stood perfectly still. The admiral spoke again. Chief. Dane inhaled once. The officer responsible for that advance later submitted reports emphasizing the successful extraction. He paused, while minimizing the tactical mistakes that made rescue necessary. One captain quietly asked, "Who signed those reports?" Nobody answered. Dane advanced one final slide, a heavily redacted command review. Most names remained blacked out. One did not. Captain Julian Kensington, operational review subject. The room erupted. Not shouting. Questions. Rapid. Confused. What? How? That's impossible. Julian finally found his voice. This is being taken out of context. Nobody listened. He looked toward the admirals. My team survived. A Marine colonel answered calmly because she intervened. Julian shook his head. My recommendations were rejected. The voice came from another officer. An intelligence commander had quietly stepped closer to the stage. I remember this review. He looked toward Dane. The communications solution wasn't yours. No, it wasn't. The commander turned toward me. It was Major Kensington's. Julian's mouth opened. Nothing came out. My mother looked between us as though the world itself had stopped making sense. You, she pointed at me. You let us believe. I interrupted her for the first time all evening. You never asked. That sentence landed harder than any accusation. Because it was true. Not once in 10 years had my mother asked what I actually did. Not once had Julian cared enough to find out. They preferred assumptions. Assumptions were easier. The rear admiral faced two officers wearing dress uniforms with legal insignia. Gentlemen. Both stepped forward. I want the complete operational record reviewed immediately. One of them nodded. Yes, Admiral. And I want Captain Kensington's promotion package frozen pending investigation. Julian stared at him. Sir. The Admiral raised one hand. No. Another legal officer opened a notebook. We'll also need to determine whether inaccurate operational representations influenced advancement. Recommendations. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. Formal inquiry, potential court-martial, career over. Not because of me, because facts had finally reached daylight. Julian looked at me, not with arrogance, not with superiority, with desperation. Audrey. It was the first time in years my name sounded like a request instead of an insult. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The ballroom slowly transformed, not into a celebration, into something much quieter. Correction. Business leaders who had ignored me earlier now stepped aside to let military officers approach. The state senator removed his glass from the table and simply nodded in my direction. The kitchen staff stood silently near the service door. Even the young waiter who had offered me the extra crab cake smiled. Not because I had won, because the room had finally caught up with the truth. I looked at my father's brass compass resting in my hand beneath the table. For years, I had wondered whether staying silent made any difference. Tonight, I finally had my answer. The truth never needed me to shout. It only needed enough time to walk into the room. I signed the last document at 9:14 Monday morning. The attorney read it one more time before sliding it across the conference table. Once this is filed, he said, the Kensington Family Trust will officially terminate. I understand. The automatic distributions will stop immediately. I understand. He adjusted his glasses. Your mother receives $6,500 every month from this account. I know. There won't be another payment. I uncapped my pen. That's the point. He watched me for a moment. I've represented your family for almost 20 years. I know. I've never asked this before. He folded his hands. Are you absolutely certain? I thought about the ballroom, the insults, the slap, the lies, the paperwork waiting for my signature, the years of believing my silence could somehow earn love. Then I remembered something else. 17 blue markers moving safely away from a battlefield because I refused to let fear make my decisions. I've never been more certain. I signed my name. The attorney nodded. I'll file everything today. Thank you. There is one more matter. He opened another folder. The mortgage on your mother's estate, I already knew. Without the monthly trust payments, Victoria no longer had enough documented income to maintain the property. The bank had been patient. Banks eventually stopped being patient. The lender has already requested updated financial verification. I assumed they would. If replacement funding isn't secured, they'll foreclose. He looked at me carefully. You could still reverse this. I placed the pen on the table. No, not out of revenge, out of reality. For 10 years, I had protected people from consequences they chose for themselves. That wasn't kindness anymore. It was permission. The attorney extended his hand. I hope you find some peace, Major. I smiled. I think I just started. By lunchtime, I had completed 3 more tasks. First, I closed the account that automatically funded the trust. Second, I changed every emergency contact attached to my personal records. Third, I opened my phone. 3 names: Victoria, Julian, Clarissa. Block, block, block. No dramatic message, no final argument, no speech about forgiveness. The silence they had spent years giving me finally belonged to me. My phone became strangely quiet. I liked it. Around 3 that afternoon, Dane called, not through classified channels. Just a normal phone call. You disappear fast. I've had practice. He laughed. I figured. There was a brief pause. I wanted to apologize. For what? For accidentally turning your family dinner into a federal personnel review. I actually laughed. I don't think that part was your fault. Probably not. Another pause. I also wanted to tell you something. I'm listening. I never thanked you properly. You did. No. His voice became more serious. I said thank you for saving us. You did. I never thanked you for making it possible for my daughter to grow up with her father. That one stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. Military operations often become statistics. Extraction successful, 0 fatalities, mission complete. Behind every statistic sits someone waiting at home. Children, parents, spouses, friends. Sometimes you don't save 17 operators. Sometimes you save hundreds of ordinary moments that haven't happened yet. Birthday parties, graduations, weekend fishing trips, arguments over homework, Christmas mornings. You don't owe me anything, Dane. I disagree. I was doing my job. So were we, he chuckled softly. Still, I'm glad I finally got to salute you in person. After we hung up, I slipped my father's brass compass into my jacket pocket. For the first time in years, it felt lighter. Late that evening, I found myself standing outside the Annapolis Yacht Club again, not because there was another celebration. The parking lot was almost empty. The banners had already been taken down. Workers were loading folding tables into trucks. The music was gone, so was the applause. I climbed the same concrete steps where guests had lined up for photographs only 2 nights earlier. The air carried the cool edge of autumn. The harbor was quiet except for ropes tapping gently against sailboat masts. I took the compass from my pocket. The brass had darkened with age. My thumb rested over the small scratch my father accidentally made while teaching me how to read bearings when I was 12. Back then, he told me something I didn't fully understand. A compass doesn't tell you where you've been, it reminds you where you're going. For years, I thought my responsibility was to keep carrying people who refused to walk on their own. I was wrong. Helping someone stand is an act of love. Carrying them forever is not. I looked across the dark water and took one slow, steady breath. Not because everything suddenly became easy. It didn't. Families leave marks that don't disappear overnight. Some conversations never happen. Some apologies never arrive. Some relationships simply reach the point where distance becomes the healthiest form of respect. I accepted that. The strange part was how peaceful acceptance felt once I stopped confusing it with defeat. I had spent years believing dignity required endless endurance. Now I understood something better. Dignity also means knowing when your responsibility ends. I slipped the compass back into my pocket and turned away from the building without looking back. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away from something. I was finally walking toward my own life. If there's one lesson I hope stays with you after hearing my story, it's this. People don't get to decide your worth simply because they share your last name. Respect should never require you to surrender your self-respect. Kindness should never become permission for someone to keep using you. And silence isn't weakness when it's protecting something bigger than your pride. But eventually, the truth deserves room to stand on its own. Before you leave, take a look at the video waiting on your screen. It's one of the stories our viewers return to more than almost any other, because it proves that the most unforgettable moments don't begin with revenge. They begin with someone finally refusing to live by someone else's version of the truth.